This morning, cranes and crane certifications and a lot of important things going on in our industry. And Joel Oliva is here to talk to us about that. He's the program manager and coordinator for the National Commission for Certification of Crane Operators since 2007. And he's worked with the organization since 2001. His focus is on legislative and regulatory issues dealing with all aspects of the crane industry personnel, as well as program development and implementation. As a member of the Specialized Carriers Rigging Association, and he's worked with the State of Maryland Crane Safety Group. He's addressing the need for crane operator certification as well as other personnel through helping set safety standards in the industry. So it's a very, very timely topic, and appreciate your attendance. Thank you. Joel?
Good morning, everybody. Like you mentioned, I'm Joel Oliva with CCO, National Commission for the Certification of Crane Operators. I'm sure you guys have all heard of us in one way, shape, or form. Obviously, our crane operator programs kind of put us on the map a few years ago, and now we're getting into some other fields. So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about CCO, the programs that we have, but in addition, I did want to touch on the regulatory side, the environment that you all might be dealing with, either now, depending on the state that you're in, or into the future, moving on into the federal requirement. Pretty small group here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to speak up during the presentation. I can tailor it to however anybody wants to go about it. So I'll just get started here. So just a little history on CCO. We, of course, were formed officially in January of 1995, so we've been doing certification for about 15 years now. We started testing in April of '96. Took us a little bit of time to get up and running. But since then, every year we've managed to improve our numbers and continue to grow as a certification program, starting with the crane operators, like I mentioned, and evolving into some of the other trades as well. From the very beginning and till right now, we remain a completely industry-driven organization. Our lifeblood, if you will, is from the industry itself. We have a very large network of what we call subject matter experts, individuals from the industry like you all, who come to the table a couple times a year to review our test questions, to ensure that our programs are meeting the requirements that they should meet, that they're as relevant as they need to be in the industry today and moving forward. We are a nonprofit group, and our task remains today the development of effective performance standards for crane operators. That's always been what we've been about. It's about a way of measuring, measuring proficiency through certification, through third-party accredited certification. And we provide a fair, independent, and reliable assessment of operator knowledge and skill. So some of our recognitions, we don't like to show off too much, but we are proud of some of these accolades that we've accomplished over the years. The first two are really in regards to it's more of a term in the certification community. As you guys know, there's certifications for all kinds of jobs out there. You know, cosmetologists, barbers. It goes well beyond the construction trades. And as a way of validating your tests, to ensure that the tests are being run appropriately, correctly, that you have the proper procedures, that it's not just some fly-by-night program, we go through an accreditation process. These are two independent organizations, ANSI and NCCA, who spend their time basically reviewing testing organizations and the tests that they develop, and not just the tests themselves, but the administration of the tests. That every candidate gets a fair shot, that everything's done objectively. We put a lot of work and pride into those two accreditations, and it's becoming more of a standard at the mandatory state and federal level. So those are important terms to know when you're talking certification. Accreditation is kind of a key component to really saying that your program's got some teeth to it. We also have our federal OSHA agreement. Back in 1999, we had a formal cooperative signature ceremony with the Department of Labor OSHA division suggesting that the CCO program would meet what is still technically the law, which is their training requirement. They require operators to be trained in their work, and certification was a way of demonstrating that. We're very proud of that. We also have some agreements with some other federal agencies, Department of Energy, Department of Education. State adoption, which I'll get into a little bit later, specific states that use the CCO program as a mandatory kind of stepping stone to be able to work in that state. Labor endorsement, we work very closely with some of the large union groups in the United States, operating engineers, iron workers, to name a few, and quite a few employer organizations, including, which we're very proud of, this organization, SEA, the Steel Erectors Association of America, and CCO signed an agreement a few years back, recognizing each other as positive steps towards safety in crane safety. So why CCO certification? Well, these are just some of the things that we think a certification really brings to the table. It takes, there's wonderful training programs out there. A lot of organizations have in-house training, even in-house tests that they do, but there's a certain level that a truly third-party certification offers, and that's what we're most proud of. Like I mentioned, it's a third-party test, completely independent from any training available. It's industry developed and supported, very much so. We have some very prominent organizations that support the CCO program. Joint labor and management effort, from the very early days, it was never a union versus non-union management versus labor issue, it was a safety issue. And it's remained that until today, and I think that's one of the pieces that makes the CCO program so successful. Big fancy word, we like to throw it up, psychometrically sound. That really gets back to the test development side of things. By that we mean that the way you develop a test is done in the appropriate fashion, that you're not just throwing it together, that you take into account things such as validity and reliability, that your tests are developed in a fair manner, that it's objective, everybody taking the test is getting the same fair shot, that anybody else in the country is taking the test. One of the challenges of a national certification program is that every candidate, no matter where he is, no matter where he's taking the test, is taking the same test. That's the key. It's very critical and it can be difficult to achieve, and some of the psychometric components that go into it help us in ensuring that that happens. And anybody who's seen a CCO test site sees how strict we have to be with certain components of it. Validated through peer review. It's a standardized test, of course, nationwide and secure. We spend a lot of time and effort maintaining the integrity of our examinations. And at the end of the day, the prominence of a certification program leads to more training. You know, a guy taking a certification test isn't necessarily going to learn more, but the guy who's taking the training to prepare for the certification test, that's when the learning happens, that's when you're going to get safer crane operators, and that's what we've always been about. We fully believe in training. Even though we don't do it ourselves, we know that training is the key. That's where the guys are going to learn the stuff, and the certification is the last piece of the puzzle that says, okay, you've been trained, now show it to me. Now prove it to me by taking the standardized test and demonstrating that you are indeed a competent certified crane operator. Just some stats about CCO. Again, we've been at it for quite some time now. These are just some statistics about the numbers of tests that we've done since '96. In April of '96, we started written exam testing. In mid-1999, we started practical exam testing. Now, you must take both exams to be certified, written and practical exams. 75,000 on the written, 65,000 on the practical. Those numbers continue to increase. Oh, these are only the mobile crane numbers. We also have some other programs which I'll talk about, but this is mobile crane only as it is our largest program. 6,500 written exam administrations, a number we're very proud of, 450,000 tests administered. Now, the reason that number is so big, of course, is because candidates can take more than one test. You can take up to 5 written exams, up to 3 practical exams just in the mobile. So that number is quickly approaching 500,000, and we're very excited about that. And about 45,000 currently certified crane operators in all 50 states. There's about 45 currently certified mobile crane operators in the United States right now. So, in regards to where our test questions come from, why we do the certification the way we do, some of our policies and procedures, it all really comes down to these 2 main areas of what we call the crane standards. Most people are familiar with both of these. First is the ASME B30 standards, which of course they're a voluntary standard, but they're more and more seen as really the letter of the law and what the majority of companies are using to ensure that they're operating in a completely safe and appropriate fashion. The 4 that we list there are all subchapters of the B30 standard. Mobile cranes is 0.5. That's kind of the biggest of all the standards, the substandards, excuse me. The 0.2 is overhead, 0.3 is tower, and 0.22 is the articulating boom crane regulation. They all talk not just about what crane operators need to know, but about what the qualification needs to look like, how the test needs to be developed, what knowledge areas they need to be tested on, a practical exam is required, medical requirements, that kind of stuff. So it does go beyond just what you need to be doing in the field, but what it takes to be to meet the qualification requirement. Secondly, of course, everybody knows what OSHA is, and at the end of the day, that is the law. OSHA is what is required across the country. There are some states that have more beefed up versions, if you will, but we do test on both the 1926 550 standard, which is specifically for cranes and derricks in construction, and to a lesser extent, although it is on there, the 1910 180, which is on just general industry. We get a little bit more into that on the overhead and some of the other tests, but all of these are a basis for where we get a lot of our questions from and where we get a lot of our policies from, where CCO develops its certification policies. So if you're looking at getting involved in taking some CCO testing, you definitely need to be familiar with every one of these per category which you plan on getting certified in. Okay, so now to the legislative and regulatory part of the presentation. Again, in the very early days, CCO was a fully voluntary process. Certification, by definition, is voluntary. But over time, it evolved into a mandatory process given the success of the program. I think states, it started with the contractors. First it was voluntary, and the true safety-conscious contractors said, this is a good thing, it's going to improve the safety of my guys, we're going to make it mandatory on all of our jobs. That's where it began. Then it kind of evolved into the state requirements, where states were saying, okay, well, this is a good idea, all the big safety contractors are doing it, maybe we should write it into our laws. 2001 was the first state that required CCO certification as a mandatory requirement. Before that, before 1995, and we picked 95 because that's when CCO got started, there was a total of 9 states that had some form or piece or whatever, they called it certification or licensing, but it wasn't always that. But it was their version of certification or licensing. They were completely non-portable. By that I mean, if you were in the state of New Jersey, that was not good in the state of Connecticut. You had to have a different license per state. Not accredited, accreditation wasn't even part of the conversation. No validation, no psychometrics, no peer review. And again, no continuity from one state to the next. I mean, if you look at the Connecticut, and some of these tests are still around, if you look at the Connecticut test versus the Massachusetts test versus the, a CCO test, they're all over the place. I mean, some of them don't even have practical components. Some of them don't break it down the same way. It just doesn't have I think the industry buy-in or industry support that a CCO or other certification program may have. So here's just a quick map of what those 9 states look like. You can see it's kind of scattered. The Northeast was the busiest. Out west we had some. And you'll notice that some of these states kind of, figured it out and eventually would adopt CCO certification. But some of these states will remain still today with their own state-run certification or licensing program. So jumping ahead, since '95, the regulators and legislators have been very busy changing the rules of what crane operator certification means. Since then, 13 more states have adopted certification or licensing requirements in place or proposed. Now, again, every state's going to do it a little different. I've never seen 2 states do it exactly the same way. However, there's one thing that's clear across the board. Every state, all 13 states since 1995 that adopted certification have recognized the CCO certification as the testing component. By that I mean, for instance, the state of New Jersey has a state licensing requirement. You need to have a separate state card to operate in the state of New Jersey. However, you do not need to take a New Jersey state test. You just take the CCO test, turn in your paperwork, and you're granted a New Jersey state license. That works across the board for all 13 of these states. There's 5 states that still have their own regulation, their own state license. If you go to the state of Connecticut, you have to take the state of Connecticut operator test. The truth is, the majority of the contractors in the state of Connecticut probably have CCO certification or another certification anyway, but they still have to go out and pay the 50 or 100 bucks to take the written or practical test that the state requires you to take. It might only be available twice a year. It might only be available at particular locations. That's one of the things that we've always fought against. We've always wanted states to adopt a national model, making it easier to get certification wherever you are, make it more accessible and attainable. But we've struggled with some of those states. Anyway, back to this. So like I mentioned, they all do recognize or require CCO certification. It increases the portability. Like I mentioned before, you can go from California to Nevada to Utah, and you can have one card. Maybe you have to get a license, but at least you only took one test and you're good to go everywhere you go. A clear bar has been set. It brought all of those states up to at least a minimum level of competence that regardless of how far above that bar you are, at least you show that you've met this minimum level of crane operator competence, that you can in fact work. It's a starting point. Just because you're a certified operator doesn't mean that you should be running, Manitowoc 4100s all day long, but at least you've demonstrated the basic knowledge and skills that's required to be, in our opinion, a competent crane operator. Accreditation requirements, of course, we've worked those in as much as we can. We did begin to get the B30 standards written into the laws. B30.5 is referenced, B30.3 is referenced where appropriate, so that the states could then refer to an actual industry standard that the industry actually has input into to be sure the standards are always up to date. And finally, which I'll talk about in a second, the state kind of led to this federal proposed rule, which I'm sure most of you have heard about, CDAC and what it means, and I'm going to detail that out a little bit more next. Real quick, here's a list of all the states that have a requirement. The bolded states with stars all are the 13 that require a recognized CCO certification, or some of which recognize accredited certification. The 5 that don't have anything, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Oregon, and Rhode Island, like I mentioned, are the 5 that have held out. If you're working in those states and you're doing crane work, you must get a state license from them. Some of them require a test. For instance, Oregon does not require a specific exam, but New York requires a written and practical test. The state of Rhode Island requires just a written test. So it's kind of all over the place. Being perfectly frank with you, and they've been perfectly frank with us, it's a revenue generator for them, and they don't want to give it up, which is unfortunate. But in those 5 states, you still have to go through a little bit more red tape to be able to operate in those areas. And we'll continue to hope that they will adopt certification, a national certification model, so that, again, it's clean across the board for all the other states you see there. I'll quickly talk about some of these states that have the years marked on them, given that they're the most relevant. The state of Washington just had their effective date come into play, which was January 1 of this year, where you have to have crane operator certification. The state of Pennsylvania is working on their rule right now. They have also adopted CCO certification. They will have a separate license, though. They'll be a little different than some of the other states. You will have to apply to the state with your high enough passing scores to be able to operate in the state of Pennsylvania. That comes into effect, I believe, October of this year, October 2010. They're still working through some of that, so I wouldn't be surprised if that changes, but that's what we've heard. And finally, North Carolina, which had their standard approved last year, which very closely models the CDAC documents. It's almost identical to it with some minor changes. One of those changes was the effective date. They put in a 2-year effective date, so in July of 2011, North Carolina will require crane operator certification or qualification. So those are some of the major ones. The other one I'll mention just real quick, Maryland, that one just came in last year as well. They also have a requirement for certification or qualification. They actually don't specifically state certification unless you're doing tower crane work. But if you're on mobile cranes in the state of Maryland and you have an in-house program and you're doing written and practical testing and documentation of it, then that's okay. So they don't require you to go all the way to certification. Certification meets that requirement, and it also exceeds the requirement. So, and we can talk more about that if anybody here is from Maryland. I know it's a little lengthy of a rule, and we can discuss that. Again, just a nice little graphic map of what the states look like today. This is the 2010 status. As you can see, they've been busy, a lot of changes. Like I mentioned, Montana, New Mexico, good examples of states that have kind of, as we like to say, figured it out and have adopted the CCO model. And then there's the 3 shaded states, which I don't want to not mention, Michigan, Missouri, and Alaska. Those 3 states are currently actively working on regulations to have crane operator certification requirements. They're all at different stages. For instance, Alaska has a bill in the House, or I'm sorry, in the Senate, and it's moving forward, but their legislative calendar ends fairly soon. Missouri also has a regulation in the House, I believe, and also crane operator certification requirements. And Michigan's taken a slightly different approach. Michigan has, they're a state plan state, they have their own MyOSHA, and the State Department of OSHA is actually writing the regulation with the advisory group that they've put together. They've basically taken some pieces of Maryland and some pieces of the federal requirement. That's their approach. We'll see where it ends up. Again, these things could happen this year, more than likely probably next year, or they could never happen because of the federal requirement. But those are just 3 of the states that are thinking about it. There's some others that are asking some questions, if you will. We very commonly get questions or we get requested for information from different state bodies asking about certification and how it works. So we try and remain as up to date with what's going on across the country. And I will also mention on the CCO website, there's a whole section of the website dedicated just to this topic. It's so important that all the contractors, no matter where you're working, you know exactly what's going on. So there's a whole page of the website we call state licensing information or issues, and you can find all this information available there, including links to the state-specific regulations if you'd like to take a look at them. Because like I mentioned, every state is a little different. Okay, so switching gears. The federal proposed rule. This is kind of the big elephant in the room and what could very likely affect everybody in the near future. As most of you probably know, back in 2002, well, it actually started before that, but back in 2002, OSHA officially issued their intent to form the Cranes and Derricks Advisory Committee. That's where CDAC comes from. Cranes and Derricks Advisory Committee back in July 2002. And it was basically the intent to have a negotiated rulemaking committee of industry experts sit down at a table with OSHA and rewrite the 1926-550 standards for cranes and derricks in construction. The current OSHA standard that today is law was last updated, the major update happened in 1970. That's the last time it was updated. Cranes have changed immensely since then, so it was long overdue, to say the very least. The 23-member CDAC committee got together July 2003 for the first time, met about once a month, give or take, had their last meeting in July 2004. They submitted their 120 or so page document, which was their recommendations to OSHA for revising or updating the CDAC, or I'm sorry, the 1926-550 standard, and then it got really quiet. We didn't hear anything from OSHA for a little over 4 years. You guys might remember in 2008, there was a couple of very large, very prominent crane accidents that happened early in that year, tower crane accidents, 2 in New York, 1 in Miami. People started asking a lot more questions. Some of the senators, including Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, started pressing and saying that they believed that this particular standard needed to be pushed through, and all of a sudden things started moving in the right direction. In October of 2008, they finally issued their federal proposed rule in the Federal Registrar. What that is basically OSHA took the 120-page document that the committee had come up with and wrote what they call a preamble. And this is a requirement of every regulation that's ever written in FedOSHA. They had to take the 120 pages and compare those 120 pages to the old standard and write up a description of every single change that they had made and why they made that change. Over 1,000 pages is what it was. 1,100 pages, give or take. We took a look at it. We didn't read the whole thing because it's huge. A huge part of it, of course, was the crane operator certification qualification component, which I'll talk about in a second. But anyways, that's why it took so long for them. Anyway, October 2008, it comes out for public comment. There was a public hearing that was actually held in March of 2009, which we attended. Some other industry individuals attended to give either their yay or nay to the standard and talked about specific components of it. It does go well beyond crane operator certification. There's some other pieces to it that will affect how cranes are used in construction, but this is the focus for this is going to be the certification piece. And then finally, in June of 2009, they officially closed the comment period. So since June, we haven't really heard much until January. This last line is actually fairly new information for us. It's the last update we've had from OSHA. Every year, OSHA issues their kind of yearly goals for what they plan on getting through. And one of the items was the crane and derrick standard. And they've said July 2010 will be the day or the date where they actually release the new proposed rule. What it's going to include, in what shape or form, we are not 100% sure. We do expect certification to be a component of it. If they change it, they can do so. They can add or subtract stuff. They're a little quiet about exactly what they're doing, but we're very anxious to know what's going to happen in July, and we'll, of course, have plenty of information on the CCO website when that comes out. So a little bit more detail, like I mentioned, the proposed rule gets into a lot of different components of construction. It gets into assembly, disassembly is another place where things have changed. The power line requirements have changed. There's some new pieces about the controlling entity. Some other components to it, but the ones that I'm going to focus on are the ones highlighted there: qualifications and training of operators and signal persons. Those are the two that will obviously most directly affect us as an organization, and I think will probably have the biggest footprint on the industry, getting everybody caught up to this particular requirement. So, like I said, it was 1926-550. Now they're updating it to the 1926-1400 chapters. And 27 and 28, 27 talks about operator, and 28 talks about signal person qualifications. Within that requirement, they have not specifically required that you go to certification immediately. The standard has an option, and the most prominent option is operator certification through a third-party organization who is accredited. But it's not the only option. There's 4 options available to you. In reality, most people are going to take the certification option because it's probably the most feasible. In the signal person, we have 2 different options available to you, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. So the first 4 options for the operator component, and this is what they're titled. This is actually what it says in the standard. Option 1, like I mentioned, accredited testing organization. That means that any accredited certification body, third-party organization, which there are about 3 of currently today, and there will be more, can offer a certification to your companies and certify your crane operators, and that would meet the requirement. Option 2, they've titled the Employer Qualification Program. Now, we're not entirely sure what this is going to look like, and I have some detailed slides on it in a second. Option 3 is the U.S. military. They kind of get to do their own thing, qualify their guys however they see fit. And option 4, which is the state and local government license. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of states have adopted the CCO program. There are some local jurisdictions as well that have their own. Chicago, New York City, Omaha, Nebraska, New Orleans are just a few that have their own requirements. And most of those states would kind of defaultly go to option 1 because they already use CCO or accredited certification. But there are a couple of states, like I talked about, that will that have the right to maintain their own regulation. States like Connecticut, New York will be able to maintain their own license as it stands now. Okay, so here's a little detailed kind of flow chart of what the process is going to look like. Option 1, again, is going to be the most prominent, the one that most people will probably go to. If they haven't already, so many companies already have certification, so they won't really have to do anything. But those that do have to get caught up, you have a nationally recognized accrediting agency. That would be an organization like the NCCCO. We determine compliance with testing and test administration criteria. By that we mean we're the ones who meet the testing criteria that the CDAC has required. Then there's an accredited testing organization and develops and administers the test written and practical to certified crane operators or operators. Again, we do the written and practical testing for both. And they do require, just like the ASME B30.5, that there's different tests for different capacities or types of equipment. They want different certifications for different types of cranes that you're using, which we split up our cranes in the mobile program. Option 2, here's the process that they have. The first piece is the accredited testing organization, which would be an organization like CCO, and we would then have to certify or somehow qualify an individual or an auditor, as they call it. And this auditor would then go and look at your in-house program to be sure that it was in compliance. So let's say you have your own in-house program, you don't want to do national certification for whatever reason. You develop your own in-house program, you would have to hire this auditor who would have been approved or certified by us or an organization like us to bless your program. Now I'll tell you, CCO does not plan on offering this as a service. There's a lot of flaws in this when you're talking about accreditation and validity tests, and I think there's a lot of liability kind of stuck in here as well that they didn't really think through too much. But that doesn't mean that other organizations won't do it. It just means that CCO likely will not. Skipping to option 4, like I mentioned, it's the state and local government authority oversees the licensing office. They basically get to run their own show. They set up their own tests, they administer their own tests. It's done completely in-house, if you will. However, they do have to at least meet the written and practical side. Like I mentioned, Rhode Island, for instance, has only a written exam. They will have to implement a practical test. So just a quick little summary of all that information. Option 1 is portable from state to state, from company to company. That certification is good all over the United States. Validity valid for 5 years. We have a recertification requirement. All of our candidates have to come back to CCO every 5 years to take the written exams, abbreviated written exams. If you do option 2, 3, and 4, there's no portability. Wherever you take it is wherever it's good for. And you can see that there still needs to be no more than 5 years and a recertification component. Again, to summarize, operator qualification and certification, they all will, the 3, with the exclusion of the military, will require the written test to cover all the components that CDAC details and a practical exam. That is going to change some states and how they do business. The practical test is a critical component. The CDAC group felt that the practical test is really an essential part of the certification process. So that's going to be an additional piece for those states. Every certification currently offers a practical exam as part of the process, so that probably won't affect too many people doing third-party certification. Okay, signal person qualifications. Again, they didn't go all the way to certification. They didn't want to take that leap. However, they did come up with the first option, which is what they call third-party qualified evaluator. It's a portable qualification. Documentation is required, and of course, certification would meet that requirement, but it would far exceed it. By third-party qualified evaluator, what they mean is you don't have to be accredited. It doesn't have, there's not going to need to meet specific criteria about what a certification body needs to do. It doesn't need to be completely third-party. Well, it doesn't need to be third-party, but it doesn't need to be completely independent. But you still need to do written and practical testing and documentation. That's the key. At the end of the day, if you're going to run your own program, it's fine. But there needs to be a written test a practical test, and documentation that the candidate has taken those tests and their scores reported. You know, that's what juries like. They like to see that qualification. They like to see those test results, and that's a critical part of the qualification piece. Second piece, an in-house program. That's what option 2 essentially is. Employers, qualified evaluator, you have someone in-house who's training your people. It's non-portable. You have to keep it within your company. But again, written, practical, and documentation of that testing. That's the critical piece for this new requirement. It's a lot different than what's required now, which is essentially not very much. Okay, so some of the statistics in regards to certification, some of the benefits we've seen over the years, the positive trends of what certification has done. The Canadians Act, the province of Ontario actually had a requirement well before CCO ever existed. Back in 1978, they actually passed a regulation that required training and testing of crane operators in the province of Ontario. And they've done an analysis over the years of how the crane-related deaths and injuries have fallen, or how they were affected because of this requirement. You can see the 10 years prior, if you look at the per year, 8.5 per year. Over the next 20 or so years, they've kept it up every year. 2002 is the latest data we have. 2.1 a year. It's about an 80% decline in death rate. Now again, that doesn't prove anything. It's fairly small numbers, but I think it's definitely a positive trend showing that certification is having a positive effect. So, again, this is Canada, not necessarily the US, and until 2008, we didn't have anything. No state department, no federal requirement had actually done a real solid analysis of the benefits or consequences of certification. Until, like I said, 2008, where we had what we call the California experience. Cal OSHA passed a crane regulation in 2003, requiring all mobile crane, tower crane, and really all crane operators to be certified by no later than June 2005. That was their requirement. And while they were doing that, they decided to track the total crane accidents and incidents over that 6-year period, from June 02 to 05 versus June 05 to 08, 3 years prior, 3 years after. And again, the numbers are small, but from 10 deaths down to 2 deaths, again, another 80% decline. And even on non-fatal accidents, basically no one dies, from 30 down to 13, 57% decrease. Again, very positive trends. We're continuing to track this data. We're hoping that other states get involved in this. NIOSH has indicated that they'll be tracking some of this information as well. So we're hopeful that this is going to show some of the positive trends that certification is offering. I mean, really, at the end of the day, the life is the most important thing. And if certification is saving lives, then it's hard to argue with. Okay, so about what CCO actually offers, the CCO available certifications. Again, our bread and butter is our mobile crane program. We've been doing that for the longest. We have 4 what we call specialties or categories of mobile cranes. We have our lattice boom truck crane exam, a lattice boom crawler crane exam, a large telescopic or swing cab crane exam, and small telescopic fixed cab crane exam. Our structure is you take a core test, which is kind of general crane knowledge, and then simply pick the specialty that you'd like to have. So you would take the core and then whatever cranes you operate. Any of these 4 categories, you simply pick and choose whichever you'd like. Then we have a tower crane program, which we launched in 2004, an overhead program since 2005, and our 2 brand new programs, which we're very excited about, our signal person certification and Rigard Level 1 certification program. And I have got quite a bit more on those coming up. Real quick, some certification policies that CCO has in place. This is a requirement of all of our candidates. It's in our candidate handbooks. It's part of our policies and procedures documents. And being perfectly frank, most of this comes out of the B30.5 requirement. It basically says a lot of this stuff in there, and we simply put it into our policies as well. We have eligibility requirements, 18 years of age. You have to, that's pretty much the main one. Written examinations, we have what we call our content domains for the mobile crane program. These are the 4 content areas that we test on the written side. Site, operations, technical knowledge, and the load chart questions. We actually pretty heavy on the load charts. We think it's a critical component of it. Basically, we have 8 load charts that they can choose from. They have to do load chart calculations, net capacity type stuff on those questions. Practical exams, we have 3 different practical exams. If you're a lattice boom, hey Steve, if you're a lattice boom guy, you can take the test on either a crawler or a truck. We just test basically the upper, the test is just on the upper. We don't deal with the carrier underneath. And then we have a telescopic boom, swing cab, and fixed cab practical exam, like I mentioned. 3 different practicals for 4 different certifications. You can get up to 4 certifications in the mobile crane program. Physical requirements, medical requirements. We do require that you have either a past DOT, like many of our operators do, or CCO also provides a short little physical evaluation in the back of our candidate handbook that needs to be maintained, kept up to date. We want our operators to be in good medical shape to be doing the work that they're doing. And again, a recertification policy. Every 5 years, you come back to CCO, you take an abbreviated written exam. If you have the appropriate amount of experience, we say 1,000 hours of crane-related experience in the 5 years of certification. If you do not have that, you must retake the practical test. There's just a quick picture of what a CCO test site looks like. We have a variety of tasks, 4 different tasks that are involved. One is taking just a chain from this circle right here over to that other circle there. Then there's a barrel task. There's 2 barrels that are out perpendicular to the center of the crane. You got to drop the headache ball into one and into the other. And then the real key of the program is our zigzag corridor. You take the load through the zigzag corridor and back. It's two different. It's one task broken up into 2 pieces, and that's really the key component of the CCO test. It's worked very well for us. We're very proud of it. Of course, there's a lot of components into the scoring criteria. You know, you lose points for certain items. You hit something, you take too much time, that kind of stuff. That's the basis for the CCO testing. We use a deduction type scoring method. You start with 100 points, and the more mistakes you make, the more points you lose. That's kind of the idea. And I do have, if anybody's interested, I have some videos that we have on our website that show, you know, a little bit more motion, a little bit more interesting than just a still shot, to get a feel for what the test looks like. There's the sample CCO card. This is becoming a very, very common sight on construction sites, where cranes are anyway. We have this document up on our website, so anybody that wants to know what a CCO card should look like, this is exactly what it should look like. We include what they're certified in at the very top, what their certification number is, what certifications they have, what designations in particular, whether they're large or small, lattice boom, tower crane, issue date, expiration date, their name, full color picture. On the back, we describe exactly what crane categories they have, detail them out. This is what OSHA inspectors are asking for in states like California and Nevada, where they don't have a separate license. They want to see your CCO card. You better have it on you, or you might get a citation. Signal person certification. This is, again, one of our brand new programs. Very excited. Testing is available now. We actually launched it in 2008, late in 2008, and the program continues to grow. Big change for us. You know, we've always done the cranes and always done it with the real deal. People like dealing with cranes. For this program, we kind of took a slightly different approach. We do cover mobile and tower crane hand signals, B30.5, B30.3, and we do hand and voice. We test both hand and voice signals. And in addition to that, it's not just the signals. You know, the test isn't you just stand up there and I ask you, give me the boom up signal, and you give me the boom up signal. It needs to be more than that. And the reason it does is because B30.5 specifically states that signal persons need to have a basic knowledge of crane operations and limitations. So it's beyond just knowing what a hand signal looks like. It's understanding that, you know, hey, that guy picks up that heavy load, that, you know, that boom's going to deflect a little bit, and how do I compensate for that? He's not a crane operator. He doesn't need to know everything a crane operator needs to know. But he needs to have a basic understanding of some of those components, what anti-tube blocking is, understanding, you know, what power lines are going to do. That's the kind of stuff that a signal person should know, because, I mean, I'm sure you guys know, there's plenty of accidents that have happened because of bad signals out there. A guy who didn't know what he was doing and getting somebody in trouble, especially when we're talking about operating in the blind. I mean, it's basically he's your ears and eyes, and it's critical that they know what they're doing, and that's what our test verifies. So on the written exam, these are our, like I mentioned before, content domains in the mobile. These are our content domains for the signal person. Hand and voice signal, basic knowledge of crane operations, situational awareness, and some of the safety standards. Practical test, now again, this is the biggest change. This is the newest thing for CCO. We are now in the year 2010, so we had to get up with the times and have a computer-delivered test. The original thought, when we started the program, we thought, well, okay, well, we'll just do it the way we do it now. You go outside, you'll set up a crane, you know, you'll run the guy through some scenarios. But when you think about it, that's a lot of money to run cranes, and that takes up time. You got to have an operator and a tester. And not to mention, there's a lot of subjectivity involved. I can guarantee you the first guy who fails his test as a signal person is going to blame the guy in the seat. So as a result of that, we had to standardize our test. Again, we're all about standardization. And we came up with a computer delivery of a scenario-based test. We have 2 types of scenarios. We call match scenarios and candidate-initiated scenarios. And up here I have a candidate-initiated scenario. This is almost identical to what you would see at a CCO test site. I'd be a candidate I'd be an examiner standing at the computer controlling the machine, and you'd be a candidate staring at this screen as if I'm the operator and you're the signal person giving me the signals. I'm sitting in the seat, you're giving me the signals, the crane's up there. That's the idea. Again, we have some actual video and sound that goes along with this, but for the PowerPoint I just put in some stills. The candidate would see this pop up. You know, he would read the question would be read aloud to him using voice signals, move the load from position 1 above the obstacle to position 2. So he's got to take it up, trolley it out, and bring it down. That's the idea. And this, of course, would move in a fluid motion. He would say stop, the examiner would stop it. He would say trolley out, the examiner would trolley it out, and then trolley stop, and then lower and lower stop. That's the idea. The examiner has his score sheet that he fills out. Did he say it right? Did he not? Yes or no? And you move on to the next task. 20 of these are total per test. 20 what we call scenarios per examination. It's been very well received. We're very excited about it. Very good response so far. Okay, Rigor Level 1 certification. This is our one of our other brand new programs. We started testing in May of 2009, so it's just under a year right now. We're still running examiner workshops to get our practical examiners, our network of examiners up and running so that we can offer these tests across the country. It's a 60-question multiple choice written test, and there's 4 tasks on the practical exam. The written exam covers these topics, again, these content domains, these content areas: scope of rigging, planning of rigging, selection of rigging, inspection, and execution of rigging. Those are the areas that we test on for the rigging exam. Our practical exam, which we're very proud of, has 4 different tasks that we test on. Pre-use inspection criteria, rigging hitches, rigging connections, and basic knots. I have each one of the tasks up here. This is actually a segment out of the video that we show our candidates so that they know exactly what they're going to be testing on. So for task 1, you basically have a table. On it is a set of good rigging and a set of bad rigging. You simply have to do an inspection. You put the good on one side, the bad on the other, and the examiner will then verify that you've selected the correct rigging, yes or no. And it's based on the ASME and OSHA removal for service criteria. Task 2, rigging hitches. You'll be directed by the examiner to demonstrate 6 different hitches using a synthetic web sling and a 4-inch round PVC pipe. So again, you got to show different hitches. There's kind of a bank of hitches that the examiner can ask you to do, and he says do these 6, and you have to do each one. Third up, rigging connections. Gather and assemble the rigging materials, and then rig and suspend the 6-inch by 30-inch aluminum square tube as described on the task assignment card. We have these little cards that describe exactly what type of rigging connection we want to see. There's a variety of connections. And make sure the top of the load is in the top position before having the rigging evaluated. So, again, because of standardization needs, the original idea, when we said, okay, we're going to do a rigging program, the rigging materials, we said you can use your own stuff. But again, especially on the inspection side, everyone's going to have different types of rigging equipment. So as a result, we partnered with Crosby, II, Sling, SlingMax, and Bishop Lifting as well to design what we call the CCO rigging kit. It's a pretty large kit that has a variety of rigging in it, both good and bad, that you shouldn't use for anything else but CCO testing, and it's a requirement that all the test sites have this kit. It's a fairly large kit. It can be shipped out in these 2 big round tubes for easy transport, and that's part of the examiner workshop. We talk about what that process is and how you use that equipment. And finally, basic knots. I would say by far the least popular of the tasks, but we felt it's critical that as a rigor level 1, you have an understanding of knots. You have to do 5 basic knots, and that's the test. So some upcoming certifications, the future of CCO. Those are the items those are the tests that we currently have that we're doing testing on now. Our latest and greatest is our Articulating Boom Crane Operator Certification Program. We literally just launched it last week. We've started testing on it. It's specific to the knuckle boom industry. We had a request from the industry that said, hey, your mobile crane program is great, but our knuckle boom cranes are different. They're used differently. The application is different. They're doing material handling, not necessarily construction work, although they are appearing more and more on construction sites. So as a result, we developed an ABC, as we call it, Articulating Boom Crane Certification Specific Program. It's completely standalone from the mobile. So if you're doing knuckle boom cranes, you need to have a separate certification. We also have our Rigor Level 2 certification, which is upcoming, which is kind of a step up from the Level 1 certification, which gets a little bit more involved. I have some information on that. Also a Level 3, which is kind of in the distant future. That's going to be more a critical lift, lift planning type test, submitting drawings, not the typical multiple choice test that CCO has been familiar with. It'll be definitely a much higher level. Speaking of higher level, we're also working on a higher level crane operator exam. We've had some requests from the industry that the CCO program is great as a minimum level, but you really need to have something that sets the elite operator, the guy who's been doing it for 20 or 30 years, apart from the basic CCO crane operator. So we're working through that as well. Crane Inspector Certifier Program. We helped the state of Washington develop their crane certifier program. The state of Washington, like I mentioned, has a rule that's in effect now. And they don't just require operators to be certified. They require crane certifiers or crane inspectors to be certified as well. We developed their tests together with them, and we'll be adopting a national test based on that state work. That's coming up later this year and into next year. So like I mentioned, level 2 rigging. The task force is currently working to get this program up and running. It's a progressive exam. By that I mean, to take the level 2, you have to have already taken the level 1 test. So we don't retest you on anything. You don't have to get the same stuff twice. If you'd like to move up to the next level, we focus on level 2 stuff. Some of the content areas are the same, but again, it's just an elevated level of knowledge. There's 2 new ones though. Identifying rigging components and technical knowledge. Those are 2 items that were not on the level 1 test that will be on the level 2 test. The practical exam, task will involve the manipulation of a 500-pound rigging box, and the task force has finally come up with what that box looks like. That's a good shot of what the rigging box is going to look like. You'll have to manipulate that in different ways. We've had excellent response. People love the test. They think it's very challenging and very appropriate for what we're looking for from a level 2 rigger. Back to this slide, level 3, like I mentioned, will be a scenario-based type test, get away from the multiple choice type format. It may involve submission of lift plans and drawings. There won't be a practical exam. It'll be all written. And again, that won't really kick out or kick off until level 2 is in place. So this is something looking forward into what CCO is going to be doing into the future. But we've had a lot of inquiries into this program as well. Finally, the higher level crane operator certification program, we're still working through this. It'll be a voluntary program, completely voluntary. We don't anticipate this ever making its way into any kind of regulation or anything like that. It's something for an operator to kind of separate himself from the rest of the pack. Industry driven, and we will have very strict eligibility requirements. For now, right now with CCO, we don't require previous experience. You don't really need to show any kind of experience ahead of time. As long as you can pass the tests, you can get certified. With this program, it's going to be different. We're talking about 10,000 hours of seat time, and at least 5,000 of those hours have to be in either large telescopic cranes or lattice boom cranes. So just 10,000 hours on boom trucks is not going to fly. The certifications will likely be only in those 2 categories. We will not have a higher level boom truck operator because they usually move up in crane anyway. So we'll have a TLL and a LBH and LBF. I'll talk about that in a second. You'll also have to submit a resume. You'll have to be CCO certified previous to applying for this program. You'll have to submit a resume and application, which will be reviewed by the CCO committee, verifying your experience, your knowledge of the crane industry, with the type of work that you've done. And it's not a different written exam. It's the same written exam, but at a higher passing score. Again, these are just some ideas that the task force has come up with. The program at the end may look a little different from this, but these are just some of the original thoughts that the committee's come up with. A challenging practical examination, that this is really where the biggest difference in this program. For any of those that are familiar with the CCO practical test, it's a very similar test, but we've just added a lot of components to it that really take it to another level. Probably the most critical one is the higher level of load control required. On the CCO test, it's just with a headache ball, and you attach the load right at the end of the headache ball. What we've done with this test is we've put in 20-foot spreaders in between the headache ball and the load, which really adds another component of control. I mean, that thing gets going. It's very hard to bring under back control. We've shortened the optimum times. We have strict boom length and test weight requirements. It's got to be much bigger cranes, 120 foot for the lattice boom, 80 foot for the large telescopic. We have a strict course. It's a very specific course for this program. And we also have a designation specifically for the friction versus hydraulic on the lattice machines. If you pass the test on the friction crane, you get a special designation saying that you are indeed a friction crane operator. So wrapping up, getting involved with CCO, these are just some of the places where you all can come to us and get involved with CCO testing. It's very easy to run CCO exams and fairly inexpensive. Beyond the candidate fees, there's very little you'll have to take care of, with the exception of obviously the personnel and the cranes. On the written side, we can set up written exams just about anywhere. Again, we don't require any type of training. If you'd like to run, if you have an in-house training program and you think it's good, wonderful. Let us know. We'll come to you. We bring the test. We bring in an examiner. You just set up a room just like this, have everybody spread out. We do the tests, hand them out, collect everything back for security reasons, ship it back to our scoring center, send all the guys their results. That's how it works. It can be done in less than 4 weeks. And literally, if you have enough people, if you have 15 people in the room, No additional fees for setting up that site. It's just the regular candidate fees. To be a test site location, you need to have a test site coordinator. We do ask that someone from wherever you are holding the test be responsible for, kind of the liaison between the candidates and us, so that the candidates know what they have to submit, so on and so forth. Practical exams. Again, this is a little bit more involved, but I'm talking to people who own cranes, so that's a good thing. You can use your own cranes. You can use your own cranes for testing. We have specific requirements to set up the sites, but you can bring in just about any crane. We'll design a CAD just for that type of crane. The additional component to it, the additional personnel that you need for the practical that you don't need for the written, is the practical examiner. We have individuals that have come to CCO and have been trained to administer CCO practical tests. They are not there to score the test. They are not there to determine whether a guy is a good operator or a bad operator. He's literally filling out a score sheet from a completely objective standpoint. Again, like I talked about before, standardization is key, and as a result, we spend a lot of time and effort training our examiners to not be judges of crane operators, to simply be recorders of what's going on. How much time did he take and how many tennis balls did he knock over? That's his only job. Of course, he has to know how to set up the site, and there's a lot to it, but at the actual test day, it's not on a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you think this guy is? That's the kind of stuff that we're very, opposed to, and some states do have a test just like that, by the way. Post your organization information on the website. We do provide that as a public service. If you have a training company and you'd like to provide training, you can go up on the CCO website free of charge. We put that information up there completely independently of ours. We understand that some companies or some people want to get certified. They don't really know where to go. It starts with the training, of course. So that's what that list is for. There's about 120 companies up there right now. We also list upcoming written test sites. If it's just 1 or 2 guys, you can go to any already set up CCO test site, and practical test sites as well. Cranes that are just dedicated for CCO testing. They're all over the country. Probably have close to 80, maybe a little less than that, 70 or 80 sites across the U.S. where you can just send your guys to do testing. Of course, the cranes are already set up, so it may not be your own stuff, but that's your option. You want to do it on your own thing, and that's where it comes down to. At the end of the day, it's your choice. However you want CCO to work for you, it can. If you want to do in-house personnel, no problem at all. You can set it up. If you want to do third party, again, also works just fine. Finally, the CCO website, some information that you can find. Again, we list our upcoming website, the regulatory section, examiners, quite a few resources there, and that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you.
How many people have CCO certified operators? Good. I know we probably have 10 people certified, and we operate in lots of states, so it's been very beneficial. Of course, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts. I'd be happy, Joel, if they would charge me whatever they're losing. I'll be glad to pay their revenue. Just make it a reciprocity.
I hear you.
Because if you got to take it and send an operator up there, you got to pay them for travel, you got to pay them for the physical test, you got to lodging, you got all that stuff. So if we could get that developed,
sure,
it'd be a great benefit to everybody.
Absolutely.
I had a couple of questions. You guys answered the question. One was about calculators for the operators taking the test. Why in the field they can use a calculator? Why can't you use a calculator in the test?
We don't allow calculators on the CCO tests, and again, we're a little limited by the ASME B30.5 requirements. B30.5 has a statement that basically says the operator needs to demonstrate arithmetic when doing load chart calculations. There's been a submitted request asking for what they call an interpretation. The question was, do calculators meet this requirement? If you use calculators in the test, does it meet the requirement? The response was no, it does not. So because of that, we've been limited by that. However, that will change when the CDAC comes out. CDAC specifically says you can use calculators. So when that rolls around, CCO will of course have to adopt our policies to meet whatever's going on in the industry. The rule will likely be passed, well, hopefully passed this year. It'll be effective 2015. So in the next coming years, CCO will take a look. We just want to remain relevant to what the industry says. Whatever the rule is, we're going to follow. So if CDAC comes out and says calculators are okay, well, then calculators will be okay.
Any other questions for Joel?
Yes.
Yeah, you're saying that it's gonna come out this year. It's going to be put in effect in 2015.
Yes. His question was basically the grace period for the federal requirement. Most states, when they take it from a state level, will typically put in a little bit of a kind of a grace period, what they call implementation period. The federal requirement, given that it's so expansive, so many operators across the country, they thought that we needed to add an addition. There's a 1-year implementation period for the entire rule, so non-operator rule, if you will. And for the operator component, there's an additional 4 years that they give you. So it's 5 years total. If it passes in 2010, they won't write any citations until 2015. That's.
All right, so there'll be a second one will have to be certified within a year.
That's right. That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, I think that might have been an oversight on their part because the number of signal person far exceeds the number of crane operators. But again, it doesn't have to be a certification. It can be a qualification. But yes, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's one of the items they change when the rule comes out, if they actually add a couple years to that requirement, given that that is, huge impact on the industry.